Hey everyone, welcome to Science-Based Fitness. My name is Adam. Thanks for stopping by. Today we're covering all things hypertrophy. We're going to talk about the ins, the outs, everything, every little nitty-gritty detail that I think needs to be discussed to have successful hypertrophy. Now you might be thinking, what does this guy know? There's tons of people that are bigger than him. Well, you're not wrong there. I'm a natural lifter and I've been lifting since I was a teenager, training for hockey, never always necessarily prioritizing hypertrophy over athleticism. But I definitely gear my workouts more towards that nowadays, and I want to lend my expertise to this topic and give you guys some good advice. In this video, we're going to break everything down into 3 separate categories. This first category, we're going to look at variables that are very easily adjustable that you can dial into your workouts today and start implementing them right away. The second component might take a little bit more time to develop, while the third are just some basic, simple tips and tricks that I think everyone should know. With that being said, everything I do list in this video when I reference research will be in the description so you guys can read that on your own. Now, really quick, what is hypertrophy? Hypertrophy is increasing the size of the cell, and in this case, muscle cell. Now, we can experience hypertrophy through 2 different ways. One is known as myofibril, and 2 is sarcoplasmic. So what does this mean? This means we can increase the myofibril, which is the contractile component, which leads to a lot of strength gains. And the second type is where we increase the surrounding sarcoplasmic fluid, which is the surrounding fluid inside the muscle. Understanding this component is not super important, but I think it does shed some good light on what hypertrophy actually is. I want to break down this first section of easily changeable variables. This is going to include things like your intensity you're lifting at, your rest time, rep ranges. And the first one we're going to look at is our rep range. Now, what is the best rep range for hypertrophy? On screen, you can see 3 choices. I'll let you guys put your answer in the description if you guys want, or in the description, in the comments. While you're down there, you can hit that subscribe button and hit the like button, hit all those buttons because it really helps this video out. But the answer is actually all 3 of these. They all can be viable options for hypertrophy. It was always kind of taught that an ideal rep range is kind of that 6 to 12 or 6 to 15 rep range, but that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. You can grow using all 3 of these rep ranges. Now, I will say that I still do recommend a 6 to 15 rep range because I think it does a lot of good things and I think it's a lot more manageable for most people. But if we're using 30 reps, we're gonna need a lot more rest time between each set because it's a lot more taxing on the rest of the body. You're going to be overwhelming your cardiovascular system with a higher rep range, and it's gonna take a few minutes to recover before you can do another set with that intensity. So this is where I think applying some basic exercise science principles and some common sense comes in pretty handy, and I think using a lower rep range with more compound movements that mix in multiple joints seem to be more taxing on the body, so using a lower rep range can be good with that. That higher rep range, that 20 to 25 or even 30 reps, should be used with more isolation movement where we use single joint movements like a tricep extension, a bicep curl, leg extension, things like that that are a little bit easier to recover from and don't rely on multiple joints. I also think it's important to prioritize some of those higher rep sets for the end of your workout. That way, the recovery component of it is less important and will less negatively affect the rest of your workout. So 5 to 30 reps, but use intelligent rep range selection for specific exercises. But one of the most important components is intensity. So how intense do we need to lift to see successful hypertrophy? Well, it looks like it's rather intense, and the research does seem to support the idea of a 0 to 3 reps in reserve rep range being the best for hypertrophy. So what do I mean by reps in reserve? Let's say I pick up a weight that I can rep out maximally 10 reps. That's it. Gun to my head, I couldn't do another rep. That means I should rep this out to at least 7 reps. 8 probably even better, 9 probably even better than that. Now, like pretty much every topic we're gonna cover today, there is a little bit of nuance I think is important to understand, and one of those is the intensity and the exercise selection should also be considered. I think squats are one of the best exercises anyone could do, but I don't think it's necessarily the best thing you need to program for hypertrophy. Me doing heavy back squats to failure, I'm probably better off doing heavy back squats with leaving 2 reps in reserve and then mixing excess leg extensions, split squats. These movements can help me push closer to failure without having a huge increased risk of injury. When I'm doing exercises like a cable fly, a lateral raise, a leg extension, bicep curl, tricep extension, those are types of exercises I try to always program all the way to failure. There are a lot safer movements that are a more controlled exercise with a lower risk of injury. Now, this is again where I think some nuance can come in handy. We don't have to push every set to failure, but you kind of have to judge how sore you're getting. And if you're getting way too sore, you might be pushing too many sets to failure, and it might be a good idea to dial back from that. Now here we get to volume, and volume we measure by total weekly sets. This is one of those variables that's a little bit more difficult to pin down what's the best for you, so you do have to use some judgment going into this. And this is because you might be a well-trained individual that's been working out for 10 plus years. You can handle a lot more volume than someone that's only been working out for 2 or 3 months. And this is where we have to be honest with ourselves and how much volume we can actually handle and recover from appropriately. And I think what's neat is these are all like dials. When you turn one dial up, you might have to turn another down. So if we turn down the intensity, we might have to crank up the volume a bit. And that's really one of the biggest factors in this. If you're not training all the way to failure, you might be able to handle more volume. Now that range that most people are able to handle is somewhere between 10 sets a week and all the way up to 30 sets a week. Someone that's able to handle 30 sets a week is probably someone who's been training for a really long time. They train rather intense. They've allowed their body to adapt appropriately with proper nutrition, proper sleep, making sure they hit all those variables that are going to optimize recovery. And for some of those people who are taking performance enhancing supplements, you can handle higher volume. But I think for most people, you should be able to handle somewhere between that 15 and 20 weekly sets, training relatively hard, close to failure, and still recover for the next week. Now, since this topic is so complicated, I created a chart, and this isn't super scientific, but I thought this represents how volume works really well. All right, so here's my basic ideal volume chart. On the bottom, we can see RPE. This stands for rate of perceived exertion, essentially grading how hard you're training. 0 essentially being nothing, and 10 being as hard as you could possibly train. And on the y-axis, we can see set totals spanning from anywhere from 0 to 30. Now, if we first only take into consideration RPE, our graph would look something like this when we color it, where the closer you get to failure, the better the results are. So if we factor in total weekly sets, we might find a better color grading, something like this here. And you can notice that there's a general green band that comes across this chart. Now, I put a couple X's on screen here. You might find that someone doing a total RPE of 8 is able to accomplish 25 weekly sets and recover appropriately. And someone that's new to training might get away with doing an RPE of 9 and only needing 10 total weekly sets. So you might fall into any one of these spots. You guys can take a screenshot of this if you want. I think it does a good job of illustrating that, where if you adjust certain variables, you'll find a range of appropriate volume for you. And it might just help you better understand where you fall with this. Let's move to the next one. If you guys are enjoying this video, consider hitting that like button. It really helps this video get pumped out to more people and helps the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. Now, when it comes to rest time, you might see someone do 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes of rest between each set. That's typically seen with powerlifters, not so much for hypertrophy, but what is the right hypertrophy range? And something we're noticing throughout this video is that different things seem to work. But that's the importance behind this video, is help you guys understand why you're selecting these variables. There's a multitude of options you can choose from and experience different forms of hypertrophy, referencing back to what hypertrophy is with the sarcoplasmic and the myofibril hypertrophy. Some research shows that 30-second rest times can be a viable way to experience hypertrophy because we experience more metabolic stress, sending more metabolites to the muscle, leading to swelling, and typically will increase our sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And similar to rep ranges, this is where I think mixing in this type of training is best prioritized at the end of your workouts, because using short rest times are harder to recover from and it takes more time in the long run. If I'm gonna hit a total of 5 sets on the bench press and I only do 30 seconds of rest, there's a lot of metabolic fatigue that happens in that window of 5 sets. My muscles, my nervous system, everything's taxed. It's gonna take longer to recover, so I'm ready for the next set, which is why I think this is a good idea to mix this in at the end of your workout, similar to like a drop set. And I'll talk about that at the end here of this video, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. The 1 to 2 minute rest window works pretty well for a lot of exercises that are single joint movements that aren't super challenging to recover from. I think in part because we don't rely on stabilizing muscles. It doesn't matter if we're completely exhausted. We can isolate that desired muscle, push it relatively hard, and we don't have to worry about those stabilizer muscles being exhausted from not having appropriate recovery. Now, somewhere between that 2 to 3 minute rest time window is more appropriate for more compound lifts. If I'm using a dumbbell chest press for hypertrophy, I'm gonna wait a little bit longer between sets so I can push harder, closer to failure. Because it's an exercise, I'm focusing on my performance and I'm focusing on a deep stretch and really isolating the desired muscle. I wanna make sure I'm recovered appropriately and I can push relatively hard. This is definitely a balancing act. When we rest a little bit longer, we develop a little bit more ATP back in that muscle, allows us to push a little bit harder, maybe another 1 or 2 reps, which gives us more volume, more time under tension. But we also run into hopefully getting a workout done in a reasonable time frame. And this is a factor we can't overlook. Not everyone wants to spend their entire life in the gym just lifting weights. Some people want a more efficient, quick workout they can get in, focus on building bigger muscles and not spend all day at the gym. So 30 seconds to 3 minutes, and that kind of depends on where you are in your workout and the exercises you're selecting. So that completes the easily adjustable variables. Now I want to talk about the things that might take a little bit more time, and that's going to be exercise form and exercise selection. Let's first look at exercise selection. So what makes an exercise good for hypertrophy? Well, I have a checklist here, and not every item has to be checked in order for it to be good for hypertrophy, but as long as you're getting a few check marks, typically will be a good exercise. Targeting the desired muscles, the first one, obviously this is a no-brainer. Now I wanna show you an example here. There's a difference between like a push-up that is obviously targeting the desired muscle of the pec and the standing chest press movement that you can feel activate the chest, but it's not really isolating the desired muscle. Next is make sure the exercise has a good amount of tension. And I wanna show 2 versions of an exercise here. Not that a side raise is a bad exercise, but when I do a side raise like this, there's very little tension at the bottom. But when I do this as a cable side raise, there's more tension at the bottom of the lift, which is why I would say the cable side raise is a better variation. Next, the exercise provides a quality stretch on the muscle. And you can see me doing a cable row where I really let this pull my arm forward, get a nice good stretch on the lats and the rhomboids. Next is stability and control. Using that exact same exercise, you can see me here. I'm able to go through my deep stretch while being super stable in this movement. Because I'm stable, this makes it a little bit more easy to control. And I think control was worth its own separate category, so I combined it here. But when selecting exercises, stability, I think it's overlooked a lot. If we look at 2 different variations of an incline chest press here, one is with dumbbells and one is on a Smith machine. If we want to make sure we're isolating a desired muscle, this is where machines can come in really handy. They don't recruit as many core muscles or stabilizing muscles, and we can isolate that desired muscle. So we kill 2 birds with 1 stone in this situation, where we're able to isolate the desired muscle and target the desired muscle and remain in a stable exercise, which is why machines can be rather effective for hypertrophy. So try not to overlook machines if hypertrophy is your goal, because it can really help to isolate and target the desired muscle. Now we're going to jump over to exercise form, and so many people make these mistakes, or I don't want to say mistakes because they're not necessarily always mistakes, but they don't fine-tune these little details that can help increase and improve hypertrophy. First is going to be a slower eccentric phase, and that's going to be the lowering phase of a lift, like what you can see here. We actually know from research that the eccentric phase increases muscle damage and can increase hypertrophy just as good, if not more, than the concentric phase. We see so many people in the gym completely skipping the eccentric phase of the lift and just throwing the weights around. But controlling that eccentric makes lifting those heavier weights a little bit more challenging. I want to bring up solid and stable core. This doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to build muscle if you're doing like a heavy bent over row. Every exercise has a limiting factor. And when you're trying to train for hypertrophy, you want to make sure that limiting factor is the ability of the desired muscle to push any harder. If you do an exercise like a bent over row using this type of a form, your limiting factor is going to be your lower back or your ability to stabilize the core. Whereas a version of a row like this puts my back in the same position, but allows my lats, rhomboids, or traps to be the limiting factor in this exercise. So I think the point of this is really just try to lift a little bit smarter. Another component to form that I do think works pretty well is focusing on your muscle to mind connection. What does that mean exactly? Well, the desired muscle that you want to train, you can actually focus on contracting that muscle a little bit harder in certain instances. I think a good example of this is a single arm lat pull down. When focusing on this pull down, I always recommend to clients to palpate the muscle, essentially prod and poke at that muscle while you contract. You can mentally focus on contracting that muscle a little bit harder than normal by actually thinking about it. Try this on your own, and you'll find that in different exercises, you can control this a little bit more and a little bit better. The last thing I want to add about all of this research is that there's so many variables where people will talk about the best exercise for growing specific muscle groups, but there is a factor to this that everyone's anatomy is slightly different. Try a few different exercises because sometimes different exercises might be better fit for you. Now, lastly, I want to talk about just a few tips and tricks that I think everyone should know. And if you guys are interested in any of these topics, I've made full-length videos on all of them, so make sure you check out my channel after this. But the first thing we're going to talk about are lengthened partials. The last year or two, lengthened partials have gained a lot of popularity in the scientific community as being better for hypertrophy. Now, a lengthened partial looks something like this. You can see me doing a bicep curl here. This is a full range of motion. Well, what happens with the lengthened partial is I cut this down in half or into a quarter or a third of the range of motion. But I only do that partial motion in the lengthened position. Now, there is a little bit of controversy because this is a more effective strategy, but the initial research only was looking at untrained individuals. Other research later came out showing that it's just as effective for trained individuals as a full range of motion. So what do we make of this? Personally, I think that you can still do your full range of motion, push close to failure, and then as I get to the end of my ability to push hard, I can still do a few lengthened partials to push a little bit beyond what I normally would do. This type of strategy could be implemented with different exercises like a pull down, a row, maybe not a bench press, but maybe like a dumbbell press. I think you get the idea here. You can use judgment to select specific exercises that won't put you in a vulnerable position. Another awesome tip for anyone trying to save time in the gym is utilization of drop sets. Now, what is a drop set? Since we're already talking about bicep curls, I have set in front of me 3 different weights for hammer curls. I rep out these 30-pound weights until I cannot do them anymore, and then I set them down. My rest time between sets here are about 5 or 10 seconds, however long it takes me to set that weight down and switch to a lighter weight. Then I rep that out to failure again with these 20s, set them down, and same thing with the 10. Research on this topic shows that these can be just as effective at building muscle as straight sets, but there's a few variables we need to consider. One, recovery from drop sets is very challenging, so I recommend prioritizing them at the end of your workouts. Also, drop sets are one of those exercises I recommend doing in a controlled environment because it gets very challenging and you're going to get exhausted doing it, so don't put yourself in a vulnerable position. And last tip here is to prioritize what's important to you. Normally for most clients, I always prioritize major muscles first, but in certain circumstances when you're trying to build, let's say, bigger calves, mixing in calves more frequently, more often, and doing them first can be a better way to train because you're not going to skip them at the end of the workout, and you're also going to make sure that they're fresh and you're able to push them pretty close to failure. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, consider subscribing. YouTube thinks this video is best for you. Here's my video on lengthened partials. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day.